Okay, with that, I am glad to welcome Jacob Lieb. Metro, as we all know, the goal line is going to be coming here soon. And Jacob is going to talk about first mile, last mile, if I'm right there, if I said that correctly. And he's going to talk about that in a relationship to really the goal line and what that means to us. Jacob, welcome. It's great to have you and your team here, and it's yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the council. We're thrilled to be here. What I'm going to do is just provide a general introduction to our first last mile plan, the process we follow, some of the thinking behind it. And then I'm going to ask our consultant, Phil Burns from the Arroyo Group, to walk through the rest of the presentation. Where we are tonight is at the stage where we have what we call a draft pathway network, which is sort of the critical building blocks of a first last mile plan and slate of improvements that will serve transit riders using the future Glendora station on the Gold Line. We're really excited to hear your comments and questions and feedback on that draft pathway network. And Phil is going to do most of the heavy lifting of telling you what's involved there. What I want to share with you, just in terms of background, is this exercise of developing a first last mile plan for our new transit lines and stations is relatively new. It is prompted by policy of the Metro Board of Directors that they approved back in 2016. Says that we will plan for access, safety, and aesthetic improvements for all of our new transit stations that will support safe access for all of our riders. We have, prior to that policy, and since we've been building rail and other mass transit in Los Angeles County since 1990, we're generally building new lines and stations without a lot of thought to what goes on in the surrounding streetscapes and what methods and routes people will be taking to access the stations and whether they're able to do that safely and easily. What that's resulted in is a lot of places in some of our older transit stations where, frankly, people accessing the transit system are having to navigate through unsafe or unpleasant conditions. We think that has an effect on our overall ridership, and it's obviously creates in some instances hardships for people using the transit system. So when the board enacted that policy in 2016, in some sense, this is a new day where the expectation is that we are looking at the critical access routes for all of our transit riders, designing a slate of improvements that will make for a better experience for people as they're accessing their jobs, their school, and other daily needs as part of their transit trip. It's really a recognition that when people use transit, they're not just trying to go from one transit stop to another. They're trying to get from their house to their work, from where they are to where they want to be, and that there's much more that we can do as a transit agency and as municipalities hosting transit stations to facilitate that travel. The exercise that we use to create a plan like this is a little bit unique for a metro planning exercise. It's very sort of interactive and very community facing. So I'm hoping that some of you have had the opportunity to be hands-on participants up to this point in the process. It features, for example, a walk audit, which we conducted in the fall, both here in Glendora and for the other stations on the Phase 2B extension. It's an opportunity for us to walk around the streets around the future station together, observe what sort of conditions we have in place, some of the strengths that are there, some things that can be improved, and some of the things that we would identify as barriers. Beyond the walk audit, we also have a series of community events where your residents are able to tell us what some of their concerns would be, what routes that they would anticipate using to get to stations. Beyond that, we've had a number of discussions with committees, commissions, and have worked very closely with your staff, and we want to thank your staff for all the support and guidance that they've given us through this planning process. So at this stage, as I mentioned, we do have the draft pathway network that is essentially an identification of prioritized routes, the streets that we think will be sort of the most important for future transit riders using the Glendora station. And then beyond that, a suite of improvements to those streets that will facilitate walking, bicycling, using other rolling modes like skateboards, scooters, strollers, wheelchairs, things like shade, lighting, all the things that make for sort of a pleasant streetscape that also support the actual needs of day-to-day transit riders. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to ask Philip Burns from the Arroyo Group to walk you through the rest of the presentation, and we're looking forward to the discussion with you.
Thank you very much, Jacob, Mr.
Welcome.
Mayor, council members. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to address you this evening and to present a little bit about our Glendora Station Draft Pathway Network. I just want to open by reiterating a couple of things that Jacob said in answering that question, what is first and last mile? And as he said, when we take a transit trip, of course, we're starting at our home and we're going to our destination. We need to travel from our home to a station. And then when we get off the transit vehicle, in this case the train, we need to make our way from the train to the final destination. So the first and the last part of that trip, or the parts that we make that are not on the train itself, what we call the first and the last mile. Not necessarily a mile, of course. It could be much shorter or much longer. Per the first and last mile policy, when we look at planning for first and last mile improvements, we are focused on, we're mainly focused on the modes of transportation of walking, biking, and rolling. This is not to say that all of the modes of transit that one might take to get to a station are not important. As we can see here in the graphic, the majority of people across the Metro rail system walk, bike, and roll to get to stations. However, there is a significant proportion of people who also drive and park at stations or are dropped off by a family member, or maybe they take a taxi or a Uber or Lyft to get there. We would anticipate, of course, that this breakdown might vary from station to station, and so that's not necessarily the breakdown that we anticipate in Glendora, but we're focused on walking, biking, and rolling because, as I mentioned, they are the most common modes of accessing stations. Secondly, because the more people who walk and bike, of course, the lesser the traffic, the congestion around the station, and the less the competition for parking. And then finally, because more pedestrian-friendly streets also have a lot of ancillary benefits for the city, such as improved health, improved environment, and potentially an improved environment also for small business and activity growth in the immediate area of the station. So just to speak a little bit about the process that we've gone through and that Jacob outlined generally for you, you can see some of the steps that we've done there. I'd like to highlight what you see in the pictures there, which are photos from our walk audit, which Councilmember Boyer and Councilmember Nelson attended. So thank you very much for participating in that and offering your inputs. And as we did that, what we did is we walked around all the streets and took in all the community members, identified strengths that they saw for walking, biking, and rolling, barriers, and new ideas that we should consider. And so the plan up to this point, which at this point is still preliminary, but what we have at this point is built based on that input. With this input then, we've conducted multiple community engagement activities, including a public workshop, which Councilmember Boyer also attended, so thank you again for that. We also did stakeholder interviews with the two hospitals, surveys at Finkbeiner Park. We were here with the Planning and Community Services Commissions on December 4th. And then in late November also, or mid-November actually, we were at the holiday stroll, which you can see the pictures there. We were actually able to talk to about 300 people at the holiday stroll. So we got lots of input and wonderful ideas, which we're excited to bring into the first and last mile plan. So overall, the issues that have been identified by the communities, the first one is an obvious one, but just want to mention it, in that this is recognizing this is a suburban community. Driving is a very important mode of transportation in this community, and some streets in particular, such as Grand Avenue, Route 66, really carry a lot of traffic, and we want to, as we think about improving walking and biking, we want to understand and sort of respect the role that those streets have in carrying traffic around the area. Secondly, was really identified by everybody as a strength was the feel of the Glendora Village. And we heard clearly that people wanted to see areas that felt more like the village in the areas, closer to the station. So particularly as we come south here along Glendora Avenue from Foothill toward the future station site. One of the barriers that was identified is that there are no bikeways in the city. There are a few bike routes, but they're just signs. There's no actual infrastructure that's been developed for the safety of cyclists, at least in the station area. And then finally, an issue that was brought up was the need to establish intuitive connections to the station portals. So the station will be located close to the intersection of 8th Avenue and Vermont Avenue, but it is sort of in the middle of a large block between Ada, Vermont, Glendora, and Route 66. And so we want to make sure that people who have never used Metro before are going to be able to know where the station is and clearly sense where they can get to it. Similarly, people who are getting off for the first time in Glendora, never been to Glendora before, can easily sense where the major destinations and attractions are in the city. Okay, so just going to present a little bit about the structure that's used to put together the draft pathway network and the preliminary project ideas. And I'm doing this just to sort of outline the structure to get your feedback on it. As I mentioned before, this is still preliminary at this point, and we're very much looking forward to your feedback on all of the ideas that are presented here. But what you'll see on the map are first routes that are in brown. The routes that are with the thicker lines we call pathway arterials, and that's just a name for the main streets that we think people would take to get to and from the station. Then a secondary layer of streets are what we call the pathway collectors, which are the lighter and thinner brown lines. Along each of these pathways, then, we have all of these different project types that can be applied to them. So these are infrastructure projects, changes to the physical environment that will improve safety, convenience, accessibility for walking, biking, and rolling. So with that, I will get into talking about just some of the major routes and our initial ideas or thoughts on them. Again, looking forward to your feedback. We definitely don't necessarily have all the right answers. So first I want to talk a little bit about the station entrances and cut-throughs. You can see here a couple of the major entrances are going to be at Glendora and Vermont, and then through the Glendora Station development, which is near the corner of Glendora and Ada, where some space has been reserved at the time of construction of that to provide for an entrance into the station. We also have identified it would be very helpful to have an entrance from Glendora Avenue as is planned in the construction authority's plan, but then also to have an entrance from the south, from Route 66 into the station area. So there is an opportunity to have a shared use path, which is like a pedestrian and bicycle path, sort of like what you see there in the lower left, following the rail line from Vermont to Glendora, allowing people from either of those streets to come into the station. From the north, you have the opportunity of connecting through the development into the station, as has been planned with the pedestrian walkway that's already there. And then from the south, Route 66, in the present time, there's no opportunity to get an access point to the station. However, if at some point in the future the Albertsons Shopping Center were to redevelop, we think it would be an excellent opportunity to take advantage of that and create a major pedestrian walkway into the station from the south. Secondly, along Glendora Avenue from Foothill to Ada. So right out here we see what it looks like today. Again, what we heard from the community was an interest in traffic calming, in creating more of a village environment in this area. Not necessarily exactly the same, of course, but moving in that direction. So there you see a picture of the village and what it looks like today. Along with that traffic calming, there could be crossings, additional crossings, particularly right here at Carroll. There's a need for a crossing, sidewalk lighting, street furniture, and then also take advantage of the opportunity to create a bicycle pathway to the station. And since it is the main access point between the village and downtown, we think it's a good opportunity to put in the safest type of bicycle facility, which you can see there, a separated bike lane where the bike lane is actually up on the curb. That would be the safest way to do it. Now to speak a little bit about Ada Avenue and Vermont Avenue. And I'm covering these two together because they sort of have similar potentials that can be explored on these streets. Vermont Avenue is, again, a very important north-south connection, and we've heard also that it, is a connection perhaps as important as Glendora Avenue is. However, in our original proposal, we'd put it here as a pathway collector, which would be sort of a secondary priority to the pathway arterial. Ada Avenue going right to the station seems to be a clear east-west connection to the city. Both of these streets have relatively low traffic volumes. They're relatively narrow. They're mostly residential. There's some industrial on Vermont. But in general, they are apt kind of streets for what we would call a bike boulevard. So a bike boulevard is a street with a sharrow on it, which means where bicycles and cars are sharing the same right-of-way. There's no separate space for bicycles. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have low traffic volumes, traffic calming, and relatively low speeds, right, to deal with any potential conflicts there. So I think we have that opportunity. There might be certain areas, for example, in the industrial area, where we might think the conflict between trucks and bikes is potentially too great, and so it might be preferable to have a bike lane in certain portions. Also need to address the new and improved crossings, and then both Ada and Vermont are potential streets for pickup and drop-off activity, by car. Off of Vermont is where the pickup and drop-off is planned to be located in sort of a cul-de-sac coming in eastward from Vermont. However, it may be interesting for the council to think about whether it would make sense to also allow people to pick up and drop off on both sides of the street on Ada, north of the station, so people north of the station wouldn't have to cross the tracks to do that. Route 66 was a street that we considered sort of in, we were considering where should the priority be between Ada and Route 66, and we really thought that Ada in general was the more important street going right to the station. And again, it doesn't have the same limitations as Route 66, which really carries a lot of traffic, and therefore is limited in terms of what you can do. So for Route 66, we've identified some pedestrian improvements, which we think are very important: improved sidewalks, street trees, crossings along Route 66, but no bikeway here, which would alter the right-of-way along the street. Then the final thing that I want to highlight is a combination of routes sort of in the northern part of the station area. So we have a path right here on the map. that northwest of the corner of Grand and Foothill that has been built by the development that was constructed in that area, and that's an excellent resource that we think could be taken more advantage of. That path will connect to APU Citrus Station once the last phase of that development is done in Azusa. We see that there's also another opportunity to have a shared use path, or a similar path off of the street where there's no conflicts with vehicles, along the Little Dalton Wash. So starting at Finkbeiner Park and then moving up towards the northeastern part of the city could be an excellent opportunity for people coming from that part of the city to be able to get to the station easily. Connecting these two, though, is a little bit trickier. So the Little Dalton Wash between Grand and Vista Bonita is it's sunken, and then it's sort of behind a lot of buildings. It's not very visible. And what we heard from the community was that to them, a clearer and stronger connection is to connect along Foothill Boulevard. So we think there are some pedestrian improvements that could be made along Foothill, like planting street trees, and then also having a separated bike lane along Foothill. You can see there how a separated bike lane can also be separated from the traffic by parked cars. Now, what you would need to do in that case is Foothill's only so wide, and so that would require a reduction in the number of lanes on Foothill. So we're interested in your thoughts about that. We also heard from the community very interested in additional crossings along Foothill and making it a safer street for pedestrians. So just to recap the feedback that we've received, one thing we heard at the holiday stroll is that people are already using a variety of modes to get to APU Citrus Station or other stations, driving and parking really early in the morning, biking, again, maybe early in the morning when there's not so much traffic, buses, the shuttle, etc. In our events so far, we've heard that people in general agreed with the prioritized pathways that we have outlined, not with 100% certainty, but in generally. There was a desire definitely to have pedestrian-friendly streets, traffic calming, and safe bike routes out on this portion of Glendora Avenue, seeing this as really a potential for improving the environment of the city. New and improved crossings and sidewalk lighting in general was identified as a priority improvement all across the area. A desire to have direct access to the station from all directions, again, from Ada, Glendora, Vermont, and Route 66. Definitely need to consider Vermont Avenue and as a major access point, also being a priority. And then, as I mentioned previously, a strong interest in modifying Foothill Boulevard as well to be more bike and pedestrian friendly. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Jacob, thank you for being here as well. Quickly, any sort of questions, feedback that you want to give to Jacob or Philip? No? Okay. Okay. Michael?
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
The pathway, I've had some concerned citizens talk about the underground pathway underneath the rail tracks to get to the other side. Is that still proposed to go forward from the station condos that are right there? There is supposed to be an underground, under the tracks pathway to the other side.
So the construction authority has in their plans, what they have is a connection. They have shown a connection to the back of the development, and I know that they are continuing to work on this issue because it's been brought to our attention that it has been brought up by the residents. So at this point, our What we are interested in is just to confirm that it is a priority of the city to make that connection through one form or another through that development.
Okay, and second question is on the railroad tracks and Vermont, on that corner, there's an existing business. Do you plan on purchasing that to facilitate drop-off and pickups?
Yeah, so I can't speak specifically to the construction authorities' their acquisition plans. Unfortunately, I'm not party to that, and that is the construction authority that's handling that.
So your purpose tonight is to just give an overall view?
Our purpose tonight is to plan for walking, biking, and rolling improvements, as well as pickup drop-off improvements on the streets within a half mile of the station area. So detailed design questions are actually being handled by construction authority.
And if I might, and I appreciate the question, while the rail project itself that's being led by the construction authority is in advanced stage of design, where some of these details have been developed through their plans. The first last mile plan that we're talking about tonight is still at a concept stage and would have a design stage that follows it. So whether there are right-of-way impacts or property impacts is something that we wouldn't know at this stage. On the specific concerns that you're bringing up around immediate station access issues at the site, we are certainly happy, either directly through you or through the city staff, to relay the latest details to you from the construction authority.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Is there a way that you could leave your contact stuff so that the city could post it on our website? I'm looking at Adam or Kathleen, and if there's questions that the public has, could they send an email to one of you and either ask whatever they want, or suggest something? Is there the ability to do that? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can make contact information available through the staff. As I mentioned, this is an interactive community-facing exercise, so we want to get as much input and feedback as we can. What I want to ask from the consultant team is, do we have a drop-dead date at which point we're finalizing our plan documents, and we would need to get input ahead of time.
Sure. We'll be, this sort of concludes the community engagement phase of the project for, at least at this stage. But I think we're always, amenable to receiving additional input. As we move forward from here, we will be working with staff to kind of finalize this level of detail, and then we'll be going into further levels of detail. So as we do that, additional input is helpful. And of course, all of this is a plan that will be, and I think there will be future stages of implementation and detailed design as all of this moves forward.
Well, there's a lot of people that watch this, and they've seen this maybe for the first time, and we have folks that watch and engage, which is good. And so I wanted to make sure that there was the pathway that people could have to engage with one of you or both of you. So if there's a way that we could do that, then that would be great. And Adam, maybe you could.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make sure we have all the contact information and make sure that's available to the public.
Gary?
Well, just to be clear about what these guys are doing, their goal is to help us as a community put a plan together to deal with that first mile, last mile. None of these are suggestions or ideas or plans that are in place that the construction authority is going to be moving forward with. It's going to be up to us ultimately to figure out, first, what we like and what we're going to do, and secondly, how we're going to pay for it.
Right.
So this is really nothing more than coming back to us with ideas and a plan for us to look at some point in the future, work with the construction authority, and then sit down and try to figure out where we're going to be moving forward. So no decisions are really being made. This is just sharing the feedback back that we've gotten from the interaction, the meetings, and everything we've had so far.
Excellent. All right, guys, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.